Hey, Wings, welcome. How are you? Hey, Sunshine, welcome in. I've got something special tonight. Hey, well, hey there, UK. Queen, how are you? I am doing pretty good today. Got a lot of work done, did a ton of grocery shopping. Not sure if that's an accomplishment or. Yeah. Hey, Amy, welcome in. Good to see you. No, tonight I have three short stories, and I'll tell you what they are as I read them. But we do have a theme tonight, which I will communicate shortly. Jojo, I depends on the depends on the book. Some of them it takes me a couple of nights to do. Tonight I'm reading three short stories, and we'll complete all three of them within the span of the evening. No, no political hands this time. I was honestly really worried that that story was not gonna do as well as it did, but you guys just locked in. It was so cool. You fell asleep. Well, it is a little late over there. I'm. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I do indeed. 2 a.m. Yep. I'm not doing too bad, Crazy Mama. How are you? Yeah, good time. Oh, Jojo, I loved that. Those two nights were fantastic. Oh, that's so sweet. Well, give her behind the ear scritches for me. That's awesome. Hey, Kaylee, you made it. I'm very proud of you. Oh, wonderful. Well, welcome in, Zoe. We'll give another minute here for people to filter in. Zach, I'll be reading here. I'll be starting in a couple of minutes, actually. Hey, Gam Gam, how are you? Welcome in. Hey, Eddie, welcome. How you doing, brother? Oh, thank you, Kaylee. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, if you guys could share and smash the hell out of that like button, it definitely helps get my lives in front of more eyeballs, and I appreciate it. Oh, Zach, I'll let you know in just a moment. Tonight is a fun night. I've got a special theme for tonight. Hey, Pajama Party, how are you? MSB, welcome. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, you guys are fantastic. Getting all set up. Nice. Hey, Michelle, welcome in. Good to see you. Well, hey, Lynn, welcome in. I think it's time to get started. Hey, Katie, welcome in. So depending on how well this night goes, we very well could cross 14,000 followers tonight. Last night's story was a whoo. Yes, I am a professional audiobook narrator. I'll have a link up to the stuff that I've done very soon. I just haven't had like 2 seconds to sit down and take care of it. All right. Well, we'll see how that goes, Zach. It's 2 a.m. Where you are? Where are you? Sounds like you're UK, maybe. Hey, Oklahoma girl. Hey, Booth. Hey, Tina. In England. Where in England are you, sir? I ask because we have several UK people that come in, and my daughter lives in Liverpool. You're in Kent. Okay. How far away is Kent from Liverpool? On the East Coast. Cool. Cool. So you're on the other side. I'm hoping to be out there a bloody long way. Colorado, welcome, welcome. That's so cool. Yeah, I've had people as far away as frickin' Norway, which is wild. I think they're actually officially my farthest. Texas, got a few in Texas. Denver, nice. All right, another Colorado. You are from Norway. Sharkeisha, you've been here before, I believe. Is that correct? Fluffy Hook, I am absolutely going to tell 3 stories tonight. La Paz, Mexico. Wow. Well, I think you're the first person from Mexico. See, I knew you had been here before. That's awesome. Pennsylvania. Kaiser 11, nice. Where in England are you, sir? Or ma'am. I don't know gender by the name Kaiser. Swedish heritage, nice. Arkansas, Washington State. My best friend lives in Vancouver, Washington State. England, love it here. Awesome. Near Newcastle, okay. Yeah, my daughter's in Liverpool. So, all right. Well, I am going to get started. I'm actually, if anybody's interested, if anybody doesn't know, I'm in Rochester, New York, just sandwiched between Buffalo and Syracuse. You support Liverpool, nice. Yeah, that's one thing I would like to do when I go over there is catch a match. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Storytime with UndeadPapa. This is a special Thursday live. I don't normally go live on Thursdays, and those of you that have been here this week know that Tuesday was my birthday, so I decided to come on every day and spend part of the day with you guys, which makes me happy. So, Gates, I live in Greece. Well, thank you. Well, happy belated birthday to you too, Christy. Why do I call myself Undead Papa? Well, I am a bit of a fan of zombies, and I've been a proud girl dad for 20 years. So Undead and Papa it just made sense, and I like the ring of it, so I ended up changing it. Well, so they go by many names. The Upir, the Strigoi, and Nosferatu. But we know them as vampires. And I have 3 special vampire tales for you this evening. One that hopefully you may have never heard of before. So wherever you're listening from, dim the lights, sit back and relax, because story time is about to begin. This is The Room in the Tower by E.F. Benson. Kind of stumbled over that. Listening from Romania. Awesome. Land of Dracula. Well, if I do a really horrible Eastern European accent while I'm reading this, I apologize profusely. It is probable that everybody who is at all a constant dreamer has had at least one experience of an event or a sequence of circumstances which have come to his mind in sleep, being subsequently realized in the material world. But, in my opinion, so far from this being a strange thing, it would be far odder if this fulfillment did not occasionally happen, since our dreams are, as a rule, concerned with people whom we know, and places with which we are familiar, such as might very naturally occur in the awake and daylit world. True, these dreams are often broken into by some absurd, fantastic incident, which puts them out of court in regard to their subsequent fulfillment. But on the mere calculation of chances, it does not appear in the least unlikely that a dream imagined by anyone who dreams constantly should occasionally come true. Not long ago, for instance, I experienced such a fulfillment of a dream which seems to me in no way remarkable, and to have no kind of physical significance. The manner of it was as follows. A certain friend of mine living abroad is amiable enough to write to me about once in a fortnight. Thus, when 14 days or thereabouts have elapsed since I last heard from him, my mind, probably either consciously or subconsciously, is expectant of a letter from him. One night last week I dreamed that as I was going upstairs to dress for dinner, I heard, as I often heard, the sound of the postman's knock at my front door, and diverted my direction downstairs instead. There, among other correspondence, was a letter from him. Thereafter the fantastic entered, for on opening it I found inside the ace of diamonds, and scribbled across it in his well-known handwriting, "I am sending you this for safe custody, as you know it is running an unreasonable risk to keep aces in Italy." The next evening I was just preparing to go upstairs to dress when I heard the postman's knock, and did precisely as I had done in my dream. There, among other letters, was one from my friend. Only it did not contain the ace of diamonds. Had it done so, I should have attached more weight to the matter, which, as it stands, seems to me a perfectly ordinary coincidence. No doubt I consciously or subconsciously expected a letter from him, and this suggested to me in my dream. Similarly, the fact that my friend had not written to me for a fortnight suggested to him that he should do so. But occasionally it is not so easy to find such an explanation, and for the following story I can find no explanation at all. It came out of the dark, and into the dark it has gone again. All my life I have been a habitual dreamer. The nights are few, that is to say, when I do not find on waking in the morning that some mental experience has been mine, and sometimes all night long, apparently a series of the most dazzling adventures befall me. Almost without exception, these adventures are pleasant, though often merely trivial. It is of an exception that I am going to speak. It was when I was about 16 that a certain dream first came to me, and this is how it befell. It opened with my being set down at the door of a big red brick house where I understood I was going to stay. The servant who opened the door told me that tea was being served in the garden, and led me through a low, dark-paneled hall with a large open fireplace onto a cheerful green lawn set round with flower beds. There were grouped about the tea table a small party of people, but they were all strangers to me except one, who was a schoolfellow called Jack Stone, clearly the son of the house, and he introduced me to his mother and father and a couple of sisters. I was, I remember, somewhat astonished to find myself here, for the boy in question was scarcely known to me, and I rather disliked what I knew of him. Moreover, he had left school nearly a year before. The afternoon was very hot, and an intolerable oppression reigned. On the far side of the lawn ran a red brick wall with an iron gate in its center, outside which stood a walnut tree. We sat in the window of the house opposite a row of long windows, inside which I could see a table with cloth laid, glimmering with glass and silver. This garden in front of the house was very long, and at one end of it stood a tower of 3 stories, which looked to me much older than the rest of the building. Before long, Mrs. Stone, who, like the rest of the party, had sat in absolute silence, said to me, "Jack, Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower." Quite inexplicably, my heart sank at her words. I felt as if I had known that I should have the room in the tower, and that it contained something dreadful and significant. Jack instantly got up, and I understood that I had to follow him. In silence we passed through the hall, and mounted a great oak staircase with many corners, and arrived at a small landing with 2 doors set in it. He pushed one of these doors for me to enter, and without coming in himself, closed it after me. Then I knew that my conjecture had been right. There was something awful in the room. And with the terror of nightmare growing swiftly and enveloping me, I awoke in a spasm of terror. Now that dream, or variations on it, occurred to me intermittently for 15 years. Most often it came in exactly this form: the arrival, the tea laid out on the lawn, the deadly silence succeeded by that one deadly sentence, the mounting with Jack Stone up to the room in the tower where horror dwelt, and it always came to a close in the nightmare of terror at that which was in the room, though I never saw what it was. At other times I experienced variations on this same theme. Occasionally, for instance, we would be sitting at a diner in the dining room, and into the windows of which I had looked on the first night when the dream of this house visited me. But wherever we were, there was the same silence, the same sense of dreadful oppression and foreboding. And the silence, I knew, would always be broken by Mrs. Stone saying to me, "Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower." Upon which this was unvariable. I had to follow him I had to follow him up the oak staircase with many corners and enter the place that I had dreaded more and more each time that I visited it in sleep. Or again, I would find myself playing cards still in silence in a drawing room lit with immense chandeliers that gave a blinding illumination. What the game was, I have no idea. What I remember with a sense of miserable anticipation was that soon Mrs. Stone would get up and say to me, "Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower." This drawing room where we played cards was next to the dining room, and as I have said, was always brilliantly illuminated, whereas the rest of the house was full of dusk and shadows. And yet, how often, in spite of those bouquets of lights, have I not pored over the cards that were dealt me, scarcely able for some reason to see them? Their designs, too, were strange. There were no red suits, but all were black, and among them were certain cards which were black all over. I hated and dreaded those. As this dream continued to recur, I got to know the greater part of the house. There was a smoking room beyond the drawing room, at the end of a passage with a green baize door. It was always very dark there, and as often as I went there, I passed somebody whom I could not see in the doorway coming out. Curious developments, too, took place in the characters that peopled the dream, as might happen to living persons. Mrs. Stone, for instance, who, when I first saw her, had been black-haired, became gray, and instead of rising briskly, as she had done at the first when she said, "Jack will show you your room. I have given you the room in the tower," got up very feebly, as if the strength was leaving her limbs. Jack also grew up and became a rather ill-looking young man, with a brown mustache, while one of his sisters ceased to appear, and I understood she was married. Then it so happened that I was not visited by this dream for 6 months or more, and I began to hope, in such inexplicable dread did I hold it, that it had passed away for good. But one night after this interval I again found myself being shown out onto the lawn for tea, and Mrs. Stone was not there, while the others were all dressed in black. At once I guessed the reason, and my heart leapt at the thought that perhaps this time I should not have to sleep in the room in the tower. And though we usually all sat in silence, on this occasion the sense of relief made me talk and laugh as I had never yet done. Wow. Like my brain just buffered in real time. Apologies. But even then, matters were not altogether comfortable, for no one else spoke, but they all looked secretly at each other. And soon the foolish stream of my talk ran dry, and gradually an apprehension worse than anything I had previously known gained on me as the light slowly faded. Suddenly, a voice which I knew well broke the stillness. The voice of Mrs. Stone, saying, "Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower." It seemed to come from near the gate in the red brick wall that bounded the lawn, and looking up, I saw that the grass outside was sown thick with gravestones. A curious gray light shone from them, and I could read the lettering on the grave nearest me, and it was in evil memory of Julia Stone. And as usual, Jack got up, and again I followed him through the hall and up the staircase with many corners. On this occasion it was darker than usual, and when I passed into the room in the tower I could only just see the furniture, the position of which was already familiar to me. Also, there was a dreadful odor of decay in the room, and I woke screaming. The dream, with such variations and developments as I have mentioned, went on at intervals for 15 years. Sometimes I would dream it 2 or 3 nights in succession. Once, as I have said, there was an intermission of 6 months. But taking a reasonable average, I should say that I dreamed it quite as often as once in a month. It had, as is plain, something of nightmare about it, since it always ended in the same appalling terror, which, so far from getting less, seemed to me to gather fresh fear every time that I experienced it. There was, too, a strange and dreadful consistency about it. The characters in it, as I have mentioned, got regularly older. Death and marriage visited this silent family, and I never in the dream, after Mrs. Sloane died, set eyes on her again. But it was always her voice that told me that the room in the tower was prepared for me, and whether we had tea out on the lawn or the scene was laid out in one of the rooms overlooking it, I could always see her gravestone standing just outside the iron gate. It was the same, too, with the married daughter. Usually she was not present, but once or twice she returned again, in company with a man whom I took to be her husband. He, too, like the rest of them, was always silent. But owing to the constant repetition of the dream, I had ceased to attach in my waking hours any significance to it. I never met Jack Stone again during all those years, nor did I ever see a house that resembled this dark house of my dream. And then something happened. I had been in London in this year up till the end of the July, and during the first week in August went down to stay with a friend in a house he had taken for the summer months. In the Ashdown Forest district of Sussex, I left London early, for John Clinton was to meet me at the Forest Row station, and we were going to spend the day golfing and go to his house in the evening. He had his motor with him, and we set off about 5 in the afternoon, after a thoroughly delightful day, for the drive, the distance being some 10 miles. As it was still so early, we did not have tea at the clubhouse, but waited till we should get home. As we drove, the weather, which up till then had been though hot, deliciously fresh, seemed to me to alter in quality and become very stagnant and oppressive. and I felt that indefinable sense of ominous apprehension that I am accustomed to before thunder. John, however, did not share my views, attributing my loss of lightness to the fact that I had lost both my matches. Events proved, however, that I was right, though I do not think that the thunderstorm that broke that night was the sole cause of my depression. Our way lay through deep, high-banked lanes, and before we had gone very far, I fell asleep, and was only awakened by the stopping of the motor. And with a sudden thrill, partly of fear, but chiefly of curiosity, I found myself standing in the doorway of my house of dream. We went, I half wondering whether or not I was dreaming still, through a low, oak-paneled hall, and out onto the lawn, where tea was laid in the shadow of the house. It was set in flower beds, a red brick wall with a gate in it, bounded one side, and out beyond that was a space of rough grass with a walnut tree. The facade of the house was very long, and at one end stood a 3-storied tower, markedly older than the rest. Here, for the moment, all resemblance to the repeated dreams ceased. There was no silent and somehow terrible family, but a large assembly of exceedingly cheerful persons, all of whom were known to me. And in spite of the horror with which the dream itself had always filled me, I felt nothing of it now that the scene of it was thus reproduced before me. But I felt the intensest curiosity as to what was going to happen. Tea pursued its cheerful course, and before long Mrs. Clinton got up. And at that moment I think I knew what she was going to say. She spoke to me, and what she said was, "Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower." At that, for half a second, the horror of the dream took hold of me again, but it quickly passed, and again I felt nothing more than the most intense curiosity. It was not very long before it was amply satisfied. John turned to me. "Right up at the top of the house," he said. "But I think you'll be comfortable. We're absolutely full up. Would you like to go and see it now? By Jove, I believe that you are right, and that we are going to have a thunderstorm. How dark it has become." I got up and followed him. We passed through the hall and up the perfectly familiar staircase. Then he opened the door, and I went in. And at that moment sheer unreasoning terror again possessed me. I did not know what I feared. I simply feared. Then, like a sudden recollection, when one remembers a name which has long escaped the memory, I knew what I feared. I feared Mrs. Stone, whose grave with the sinister inscription "In evil memory" I had so often seen in my dream, just beyond the lawn which lay below my window. And then, once more, the fear passed so completely that I wondered what there was to fear, and I found myself sober and quiet and sane in the room in the tower, the name of which I had so often heard in my dream, and the scene of which was so familiar. I looked around it with a certain sense of proprietorship, and found that nothing had been changed from the dreaming nights in which I knew it so well. Just to the left of the door was the bed, lengthwise along the wall, with the head of it in the angle. In a line with it was the fireplace, and a small bookcase. Opposite the door, the outer wall was pierced by 2 lattice-paneled windows, between which stood the dressing-table, which ranged along the 4th wall was the washing-stand and a big cupboard. My luggage had already been unpacked, for the furniture of dressing and undressing lay orderly on the washstand and toilet table, while my dinner clothes were spread out on the coverlet of the bed. And then, with a sudden start of unexplained dismay, I saw that there were two rather conspicuous objects which I had not seen before in my dreams. One, a life-sized oil painting of Mrs. Stone, the other a black and white sketch of Jack Stone, representing him as he had appeared to me only a week before in the last of the series of these repeated dreams. A rather secret and evil-looking man of about 30. His picture hung between the windows, looking straight across the room to the other portrait, which hung at the side of the bed. At that I looked next, and as I looked I felt once more the horror of nightmare seize me. It represented Mrs. Stone as I had seen her last in my dreams, old and withered and white-haired. But in spite of the evident feebleness of body, a dreadful exuberance and vitality shone through the envelope of flesh. An exuberance wholly malign, a vitality that foamed and frothed with unimaginable evil. Evil beamed from the narrow, leering eyes. It laughed in the demon-like mouth. The whole face was instinct with some secret and appalling mirth. The hands, clasped together on the knee, seemed shaking with suppressed and nameless glee. Then I saw also that it was signed in the left-hand bottom corner, and wondering who the artist could be, says it was disconnected. That's weird. I looked more closely and read the inscription, Julia Stone, by Julia Stone. There came a tap at the door. John and John Clinton entered. "Got everything you want?" he asked. "Rather more than I want," said I, pointing to the picture. He laughed. "A hard-featured old lady," he said. "By herself, too, I remember. Anyhow, she can't have flattered herself much." "But don't you see," said I, "it's scarcely a human face at all. It's the face of some witch or some devil." He looked at it more closely. "Yes, it isn't very pleasant," he said. "Scarcely a bedside manner, eh? Yes, I can manage getting the nightmare if I went to sleep with that close by my bed. I'll have it taken down if you like." "I really wish you would," I said. He rang the bell, and with the help of a servant we detached the picture and carried it out onto the landing and put it with its face to the wall. "By Jove, the old lady is a weight," said John, mopping his forehead. "I wonder if she had something on her mind." The extraordinary weight of the picture had struck me, too. I was about to reply when I caught sight of my own hand. There was blood on it, in considerable quantities covering the whole palm. "I've cut myself somehow," said I. John gave a little startled exclamation. "Why, I have too," he said. Simultaneously, the footman took out his handkerchief and wiped his hand with it. I saw that there was blood also on his handkerchief. John and I went back into the tower and washed the blood off. But neither on his hand nor mine was there the slightest trace of a scratch or cut. It seemed to me that, having ascertained this, we both, by sort of tacit consent, did not allude to it again. Something in my case had dimly occurred to me that I did not wish to think about. It was but a conjecture, but I fancied that I knew the same thing had occurred to him. The heat and oppression of the air for the storm we had expected was still undischarged, increased very much after dinner. And for some time most of the party, among whom were John Clinton and myself, sat outside on the path bounding the lawn, where we had had tea. The night was absolutely dark, and no twinkle of star or moon ray could penetrate the pall of cloud that overset the sky. By degrees our assembly thinned. The women went up to bed, men dispersed to the smoking or billiard room, and by 11 o'clock my host and I were the only two left. All the evening I thought that he had something on his mind, and as soon as we were alone, he spoke. "The man who helped us with the picture had blood on his hand, too. Did you notice?" he said. "I asked him just now if he had cut himself, and he said he supposed he had, but that he could find no mark of it." "Now where did that blood come from?" By dint of telling myself that I was not going to think about it, I had succeeded in not doing so, and I did not want, especially just at bedtime, to be reminded of it. "I don't know," said I, "and I don't really care so long as the picture of Mrs. Stone is not by my bed." He got up. "But it's odd," he said. "Ha! Now you'll see another odd thing." A dog of his, an Irish terrier by breed, had come out of the house as we talked. The door behind us in the hall was open, and a bright oblong of light shone across the lawn to the iron gate which led to the rough grass outside, where the walnut tree stood. I saw that the dog had all his hackles up, bristling with rage and fright. His lips were curled back from his teeth, as if he was ready to spring at something, and he was growling to himself. He took not the slightest notice of his master or me, but stiffly and tensely walked across the grass to the iron gate. There he stood for a moment, looking through the bars and still growling. Then, of a sudden, his courage seemed to desert him. He gave one long howl and scuttled back to the house with a curious crouching sort of movement. "He does that 6 times a day," said John. "He sees something which he both hates and fears." I walked to the gate and looked over it. Something was moving on the grass outside, and soon a sound which I could not identify came to my ears. Then I remembered what it was. It was the purring of a cat. I lit a match and saw the purrer, a big blue Persian, walking round and round in a little circle just outside the gate, stepping high and ecstatically, with tail carried aloft like a banner. Its eyes were bright and shining, and every now and then it put its head down and sniffed at the grass. I laughed. "The end of that mystery, I'm afraid," I said. "There's a large cat having Walpurgis night all alone." "Yes, that's Darius," said John. "He spends half the day and all night there. But that's not the end of the dog mystery. For Toby and he are the best of friends, but the beginning of the cat mystery. What's the cat doing there? And why is Darius pleased while Toby is terror-stricken?" At that moment I remembered the rather horrible detail of my dreams when I saw through the gate. Just where the cat was now, the white tombstone with the sinister inscription. But before I could answer, the rain began as suddenly and heavily as if a tap had been turned on, and simultaneously the big cat squeezed through the bars of the gate and came leaping across the lawn to the house for shelter. Then it sat in the doorway, looking out eagerly into the dark. It spat and struck at John with its paw as he pushed it in order to close the door. Somehow, with the portrait of Julia Stone on the passage outside, the room in the tower had absolutely no alarm for me. And as I went to bed, feeling very sleepy and heavy, I had nothing more than interest for the curious incident about our bleeding hands and the conduct of the cat and dog. The last thing I looked at before I put out my light was the square, empty space by my bed where the portrait had been. Here the paper was of its original full tint of dark red. Over the rest of the walls it had faded. Then I blew out my candle and instantly fell asleep. My awakening was equally instantaneous, and I sat bolt upright in bed under the impression that some bright light had been flashed in my face, though it was now absolutely pitch dark. I knew exactly where I was, in the room which I had dreaded in dreams, but no horror that I ever felt when asleep approached the fear that now invaded and froze my brain. Immediately after a peal of thunder crackled just above the house, but the probability that it was only a flash of lightning which awoke me gave no reassurance to my galloping heart. Something I knew was in the room with me, and I instinctively put out my right hand, which was the nearest to the wall, to keep it away, and my hand touched the edge of a picture frame hanging close to me. I sprang out of bed, upsetting the small table that stood by it, and I heard my watch, candle, and matches, for a blinding flash leaped out of the clouds and showed me that my bed again hung the picture of Mrs. Stone. And instantly the room went into blackness again. But in that flash I saw another thing, namely a figure that leaned over the end of my bed, watching me. It was dressed in some close-clinging white garment, spotted and stained with mold, and the face was that of the portrait. Overhead the thunder cracked and roared, and when it ceased, and the deathly stillness succeeded, I heard the rustle of movement coming nearer me, and more horrible yet, perceived an odor of corruption and decay. Then a hand was laid on the side of my neck, and close beside my ear I heard quick-taken, eager breathing. Yet I knew that this thing, though it could be perceived by touch, by smell, by eye, and by ear, was still not of this earth, but something that had passed out of the body and had power to make itself manifest. Then a voice, already familiar to me, spoke. "I knew you would come to the room in the tower," it said. "I have been long waiting for you. At last you have come. Tonight I shall feast. Before long we will feast together." The quick breathing came closer to me. I could feel it on my neck. At that, the terror which I think had paralyzed me for the moment gave way to the wild instinct of self-preservation. I hit wildly with both arms, kicking out at the same moment, and heard a little animal squeal, and something soft dropped with a thud beside me. I took a couple of steps forward, nearly tripping up over whatever it was that lay there, and by the merest good luck found the handle of the door. In another second I ran out on the landing and had banged the door behind me. Almost at the same time I heard a door open somewhere below, and John Clinton, candle in hand, came running upstairs. "What is it?" he said. "I sleep just below you and heard a noise as if... Good heavens, there's blood on your shoulder." I stood there, so he told me afterwards, swaying from side to side, white as a sheet, with the mark on my shoulder as if a hand covered in blood had been laid there. "It's still in there," I said, pointing. "She, you know. The portrait is in there, too, hanging up on the wall we took it from." At that he laughed. "My dear fellow, this is mere nightmare." He pushed by me and opened the door. I, standing there simply inert with terror, unable to stop him, unable to move. "Phew! What an awful smell," he said. Then there was silence. He had passed out of my sight behind the open door. Next moment he came out again, as white as myself, and instantly shut it. "Yes, the portrait's there," he said. "And on the floor is a thing spotted with earth, like what they bury people in. Come away, quick, come away." How I got downstairs, I hardly know. An awful shuddering and nausea of the spirit rather than of the flesh had seized me, and more than once he had to place my feet upon the steps, while every now and then he cast glances of terror and apprehension up the stairs. But in time we came to his dressing room on the floor below, and there I told him what I have here described. The sequel can be made short. Indeed, some of my readers have perhaps already guessed what it was, if they remember that inexplicable affair of the churchyard at West Foley some 8 years ago, where an attempt was made 3 times to bury the body of a certain woman who had committed suicide. On each occasion the coffin was found in the course of a few days, again protruding from the ground. After the 3rd attempt, in order that the thing should not be talked about, the body was buried elsewhere in unconsecrated ground. Where it was buried was just outside the iron gate of the garden belonging to the house where this woman had lived. She had committed suicide in a room at the top of the tower in that house. Her name was Julia Stone. Subsequently, the body was again secretly dug up, and the coffin was found to be full of blood. Okay, now that was a good one. Oh, stop it, TikTok. It's a freaking story. They don't like me that I use this particular word. Your live is not eligible for recommendation and restricted in the search results for the next 10 minutes because your live does not comply with the For You feed eligibility standards under our community guidelines. Reason: mental health. Stupid app. Well, that's all right. 10 minutes won't hurt anybody. Telling you. Wow, 50,000 likes. You guys are awesome. Yeah, let's pound that like button and see if we can overcome TikTok's BS. That's right. After 10 minutes, go crazy sharing. Yeah, absolutely. So when it hits 10:05, I'm glad you guys liked the story. I really liked it. I thought it was awesome. Despite the algorithm not liking it, which is fine. It can do that. If it didn't like that one, it's sure as hell not going to like the next one. OBS Studio is... That's weird because I'm not seeing any dropped frames. Yeah. All right. Power tapping. Totally fine. Right? My lives help people's mental health. I don't know. I refuse to use other words. I think it's dumb. This is classic literature. I really don't think I have a right to mess with the author's words. So, next story is called Four Wooden Stakes. That's right. Entertainment purposes only. See, now I'm curious. Whoa, look at that. 13,876. We are like just on the cusp of 14,000. That's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. All right. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? This one is called Four Wooden Stakes by Victor Rowan. Not recommending vampirism. No, I don't recommend it. It's problematic. Yeah. There it lay on the desk in front of me, that missive so simple in wording, yet so perplexing, so urgent in tone. Jack, come at once for old time's sake. Am all alone. Will explain upon arrival. Remsen. Having spent the past 3 weeks in bringing to a successful termination a case that had puzzled the police and 2 of the best detective agencies in the city, I decided I was entitled to a rest, so I ordered 2 grips packed and went in search of a timetable. It was several years since I had seen Remsen Holroyd. In fact, I had not seen him since we had matriculated from college together. I was curious to know how he was getting along, to say nothing of the little diversion he promised me in the way of a mystery. The following afternoon found me standing on the station platform in the little town of Charing, a village of about 1,500 souls. Remsen's place was about 10 miles from there, so I stepped forward to the driver of a shay and asked if he would kindly take me to the Holroyd estate. He clasped his hands in what seemed to be a silent prayer, shuddered slightly, then looked at me with an air of wonder, mingled with suspicion. "I don't know what you wants to go out there for, stranger, but yell if you take the advice of a God-fearing man. You'll turn back where you came from. There be some might fearful tales concerning that place floating around, and more'n one tramp's been found near there so weak from loss of blood and fear could hardly crawl. There's something there. Be it man or beast, I don't know. But as for me, I wouldn't drive you out there for $100 cash." This was not at all encouraging, but I was not to be influenced by the talk of a superstitious old gossip, so I cast about for a less impressionable rustic who would undertake the trip to earn the ample reward I promised at the end of the ride. To my chagrin, they all acted like the first. Some crossed themselves fervently, while others gave me one wild look and ran as if I were in alliance with the devil. By now my curiosity was thoroughly aroused, and I was determined to see the thing through to a finish if it cost me my life. So, casting a last contemptuous look on those poor misguided souls, I stepped out briskly in the direction pointed out to me. However, I had gone but scant 2 miles when the weight of the valises began to tell, and I slackened pace considerably. The sun was just disappearing beneath the treetops when I caught my first glimpse of the old homestead, now deserted but for its one occupant. Time and the elements had laid heavy hands upon it, for there was hardly a window that could boast its full quota of panes, while the shutters banged and creaked with a noise dismissal enough to daunt even the strong of heart. About 100 yards back I discerned a small building built of gray stone, pieces of which seemed to be lying all around it, partly covered by the dense growth of vegetation that overran the entire countryside. On closer observations I realized that the building was a crypt, while what I had taken to be pieces of the material scattered around were really tombstones. Evidently this was the family burying ground. But why had certain members been interred in a mausoleum while the remainder of the family had been buried in the ground in the usual manner? Having observed thus much, I turned my steps toward the house, for I had no intention of spending the night with naught but the dead for company. Indeed, I began to realize just why those simple country folk had refused to aid me, and a hesitant doubt began to assert itself as to the expediency of my being there, when I might have been at the shore or at the country club enjoying life to the full. By now the sun had completely slid from view, and in the semi-darkness the place presented an even drearier aspect than before. With a great display of bravado I stepped upon the veranda, slammed my grips upon a seat very much the worse for wear, and pulled lustily at the knob. Peal after peal reverberated throughout the house, echoing and re-echoing from room to room till the whole structure rang. Then all was still once more, save for the sighing of the wind and the creaking of the shutters. A few minutes passed, and the sound of footsteps approaching the door reached my ears. Another interval, and the door was cautiously opened a few inches, while a head shrouded by the darkness scrutinized me closely. Then the door was flung wide, and Remsen, I hardly knew him, so changed was he, rushed forward, and throwing his arms around me, thanked me again and again for heeding his plea, till I thought he would go into hysterics. I begged him to brace up, and the sound of my voice seemed to help him, for he apologized rather shamefacedly for his discourtesy, and led the way along the wide hall. There was a fire blazing merrily in the sitting-room, and after partaking generously of a repast, for I was famished after my long walk, I was seated in front of it, facing Remsen and waiting to hear his story. "Jack," he began, "I'll start at the beginning and try to give you the facts in their proper sequence. 5 years ago, my family circle consisted of 5 persons. My grandfather, my father, 2 brothers, and myself, the baby of the family. My mother died, when I was a baby. Now," his voice broke, and for a moment he was unable to continue. "There's only myself left. he went on. "And so help me God, I'm going to, unless you can solve the damnable mystery that hovers over this house and put an end to that something which took my kin and is gradually taking me." Granddad was the first to go. He spent the last few years of his life in South America. Just before leaving there, he was attacked while asleep by one of those huge bats. Next morning, he was so weak he couldn't walk. That awful thing had sucked his lifeblood away. He arrived here, but was sickly until his death a few weeks later. The medicos couldn't agree as to the cause of death, so they laid it to old age and let it go at that. But I knew better. It was his experience in the South that had done it for him. In his will, he asked that a crypt be built immediately and his body interred therein. His wish was carried out, and his remains lie in that little gray vault that you may have noticed if you cut around behind the house. Then my dad began failing, and just pined away until he died. What puzzled the doctors was the fact that right up until the end he consumed enough food to sustain 3 men. Yet he was so weak, he lacked the strength to drag his legs over the floor. Oops. I scrolled up and I lost my place. He was buried, or rather interred, with Granddad. The same symptoms were in evidence in the cases of George and Fred. They are both lying in the vault. And now, Jack, I'm going too. For of late my appetite has increased to alarming proportions, yet I am as weak as a kitten. Nonsense, I chided. We'll just leave this place for a while and take a trip somewhere, and when you return you'll laugh at your fears. It's all a case of overwrought nerves, and there is certainly nothing strange about the deaths you speak of. They're probably due to some hereditary disease. More than one family has passed out in a hurry just on that account. Jack, I only wish I could think so, but somehow I know better. And as for leaving here, I just can't get away. There is a morbid fascination about the place which holds me. If you want to be a real friend, just stick around for a couple of days, and if you don't find anything, I'm sure the sight of you and the sound of your voice will do wonders for me. I agreed to do my best, although I was hard to put to keep from smiling at his fears, so apparently groundless were they. We talked on other subjects for several hours, then I proposed bed, saying that I was very tired after my journey and subsequent walk. Remsen showed me to my room, and after seeing that everything was comfortable as possible, he bade me good night. As he turned to leave the room, the flickering light from the lamp fell on his neck, and I noticed 2 small punctures in the skin. I questioned him regarding them, but he replied that he must have beheaded a pimple, and that he hadn't noticed them before. He again said good night, and left the room. I undressed and tumbled into bed. During the night I was conscious of an overpowering feeling of suffocation, as if some great burden was lying on my chest, which I could not dislodge. And in the morning when I awoke, I experienced a curious sensation of weakness. I arose not without an effort and began divesting myself of my sleeping suit. As I folded the jacket, I noticed a thin line of blood on the collar. I felt my neck, a terrible fear overwhelming me. It pained slightly at the touch, I rushed to examine it in the mirror. 2 tiny dots rimmed with blood, my blood, and on my neck. No longer did I chuckle at Remsen's fears, for it, the thing, had attacked me as I slept. I dressed as quickly as my condition would permit and went downstairs, thinking to find my friend there. He was not about. So I looked about outside, but he was not in evidence. There was but one answer to the question. He had not yet arisen. It was 9 o'clock, so I resolved to awaken him. Not knowing which room he occupied, I entered one after another in a fruitless search. They were all in various stages of disorder, and the thick coating of dust on the furniture showed that they had been untenanted for some time. At last, in a bedroom on the north side of the 3rd floor, I found him. He was lying spread-eagle fashion across the bed, still in his pajamas, and I leaned forward to shake him. My eyes fell on 2 drops of blood splattered on the coverlet. I crushed back a wild desire to scream and shook Remsen rather roughly. His head rolled to one side, and the hellish perforations on his throat showed up vividly. They looked fresh and raw, and had increased to much greater dimensions. I shook him with increased vigor, and at last he opened his eyes stupidly and looked around. Then, seeing me, he said in a voice loaded with anguish, resignation, and despair, "It's been here again, Jack. I can't hold out much longer. May God take my soul when I go." So saying, he fell back again from sheer weakness. I left him and went about preparing myself some breakfast. I had thought it best not to destroy his faith in me by telling him that I, too, had suffered at the hands of his persecutor. A walk brought me some peace of mind, if not a solution, and when I returned about noon to the big house, Remsen was up and around. Together we prepared a really excellent meal. I was hungry and did justice to my share, but after I had finished, my friend continued eating until I thought he must either disgorge or burst. Then, after putting things to rights, we strolled about the long hall, looking at the oil paintings, many of which were very valuable. At one end of the hall I discovered a portrait of an old gentleman, evidently Beau Brummel, in his day. He wore his hair in the long, flowing fashion adopted by the old school, and sported a carefully trimmed mustache and Van Dyke beard. Remsen noticed my interest in the painting and came forward. "I don't wonder that picture holds your interest, Jack. It has a fascination for me also. At times I sit for hours studying the expression on that face. Sometimes I think he has something to tell me. But of course that's all tommy rot. But I beg your pardon. I haven't introduced the old gent yet, have I? This is my granddad. He was a great old boy in his day, and he might be living yet for that cursed bloodsucker. Perhaps it is such a creature that's doing for me. What do you think?" "I wouldn't like to venture an opinion, Remsen. Unless I'm badly mistaken, we must dig deeper for an explanation. We'll know tonight, however. You'll retire as usual, and I'll keep a close watch, and we'll solve the riddle or die in the attempt." Remsen said not a word, but silently extended his hand. I clasped it in a firm embrace, and in each other's eyes we read complete understanding. To change the trend of thought, I questioned him on the servant problem. "I've tried time and again to get servants that would stay," he replied. "But about the 3rd day they would begin acting queer. and the first thing I'd know they'd have skipped bag and baggage. That night I accompanied my friend to his room and remained until he had disrobed and was ready to retire. Several of the window panes were cracked, and one was entirely missing. I suggested boarding up the aperture, but he declined, saying that he rather enjoyed the night air, so I dropped the matter. As it was still early, I sat by the fire in the sitting room and read for an hour or two. I confess that there were many times when my mind wandered up from the printed page before me, and chills raced up and down my spine as some new sound was borne to my ears. The wind had risen, and was whistling through the trees with a peculiar whining sound. The creaking of the shutters tended to further the eerie effect, and in the distance could be heard the hooting of numerous owls, mingled with the cries of miscellaneous nightfowl and other nocturnal creatures. As I ascended the 2 flights of steps, the candle in my hand casting grotesque shadows on the walls and ceiling, I had little liking for my job. Many times in the course of duty I had been called upon to display courage, but it took more than mere courage to keep me going now. I extinguished the candle and crept forward to Remsen's room, the door of which was closed. Being careful to make no noise, I knelt and looked in at the keyhole. It afforded me a clear view of the bed and 2 of the windows on the opposite wall. Gradually, my eyes became accustomed to the darkness, and I noticed a faint reddish glow outside one of the windows. It apparently emanated from nowhere. Hundreds of little specks danced and whirled in the spot of light, and as I watched them fascinated, they seemed to take on the form of a human face. The features were masculine, as was also the arrangement of the hair. Then the mysterious glow disappeared. So great had the strain been on me that I was wet from perspiration, although the night was cool. For a moment I was undecided whether to enter the room or stay where I was and use the keyhole as a means of observation. I concluded to remain where I was would be the better plan. So I once more placed my eye to the hole. Immediately my attention was drawn to something moving where the light had been. At first, owing to the poor light, I was unable to distinguish the general outline and the form of the thing. Then I saw. It was a man's head. So help me God, it was the exact reproduction of that picture I had seen in the hall that very morning. But oh, the difference in expression. The lips were drawn back in a snarl, disclosing 2 sets of pearly white teeth, the canines overdeveloped and remarkably sharp. The eyes, an emerald green in color, stared in, a look of consuming hate. The hair was sadly disarranged, while on the beard was a large clot of what seemed to be congealed blood. I noticed thus much, then the head melted from my sight, and I transferred my attention to a great bat that circled round and round, his huge wings beating a tattoo on the panes. Finally, he circled around the broken pane and flew straight through the hole made by the missing glass. For a few moments he was shut off from my view. Then he reappeared and began circling around my friend, who lay sound asleep, blissfully ignorant of all that was occurring. Nearer and nearer it drew, then swooped down and fastened itself to Remsen's throat just over the jugular vein. At this I rushed into the room and made a wild dash for the tiling that had come night after night to gorge itself on my friend. but to no avail. It flew out of the window and away, and I turned my attention to the sleeper. "Remsen, old man, get up!" He sat up like a shot. "What's the matter, Jack? Has it been here?" "Never mind just now," I replied. "Just dress as hurriedly as possible. We have a little work before us this evening." He glanced questioningly toward me, but followed my command without argument. I turned and cast my eye about the room for a suitable weapon. There was a stout stick lying in the corner, and I made toward it. "Jack!" I wheeled around. "What is it? Damn it all, haven't you any sense? Almost scaring a man to death?" He pointed a shaking finger toward the window. "There! I swear I saw him. It was my granddad, but oh, how disfigured!" He threw himself upon the bed and began sobbing. The shock had completely unnerved him. "Forgive me, old man," I pleaded. "I was too quick. Pull yourself together, and we may yet get to the bottom of things tonight." When he had finished dressing, we left the house. There was no moon out, and it was pitch dark. I led the way, and soon we came to within 10 yards of the little gray crypt. I stationed Remsen behind a tree with instructions to just use his eyes, and I took up my stand on the other side of the vault. After making sure that the door into it was closed and locked. For the greater part of an hour we waited without result, and I was about ready to call it off when I perceived a white figure flitting between the trees about 50 feet away. Slowly it advanced straight toward us, and as it drew closer I looked, not at it, but through it. The wind was blowing strongly, yet not a fold in the long shroud quivered. Just outside the vault it paused and looked around. Even knowing as I did about what to expect, it was a decided shock when I looked into the eyes of the old Hollerod, deceased these past 5 years. I heard a gasp, and knew that Remsen had seen too, and recognized. Then the spirit, ghost, or whatever it was, passed into the crypt through the crack between the door and the jamb. A space not 1/16 of an inch wide. As it disappeared, Remsen came running forward, his face wholly drawn of color. "What was it, Jack? What was it? I know it resembled Granddad, but it couldn't have been he. He's been dead 5 years." "Let us go back to the house," I answered, "and I'll explain things to the best of my ability. I may be wrong, of course, but it wouldn't hurt to try my remedy. Remsen, what we're up against is a vampire. Not the female species usually spoken of today, but the real thing. I noticed you had an old edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. If you'll bring me volume 24, I'll be able to explain more fully the meaning of the word." He left the room and returned, carrying the desired book. Turning to page 52, I read. Holy cow. My apologies. I'm trying not to be. I didn't get an energy drink today, so I'm like, huh? Vampire. A term apparently of Servian origin, originally applied in Eastern Europe to blood-sucking ghosts, but in modern usage transferred to one or more species of blood-sucking bats inhabiting South America. In the first mentioned meaning, a vampire is usually supposed to be the soul of a dead man which quits the buried body by night to suck the blood of living persons. Hence, when the vampire's grave is opened, his corpse is found to be fresh and rosy from the blood thus absorbed. They are accredited with the power of assuming any form they may desire, and often fly about as specks or dust, pieces of down or straw, etc. To put an end to his ravages, a stake is driven through him, or his head cut off, or his heart torn out, or boiling water and vinegar poured over the grave. The persons who turn vampires are wizards, witches. Won't use that word because I don't want to get tagged again. And those who have come to a violent end. Also, the death of anyone resulting from these vampires will cause that the person to join their hellish throng. See Calumet's dissertation on the vampires of Hungary. I looked at Remsen. He was staring straight into the fire. I knew what he realized the task before us, and it was steeling himself to it. When he turned to me, "Jack, we'll wait until morning." That was all. I understood, and he knew. There we sat, each struggling with his own thoughts, until the first faint glimmers of light came struggling through the trees and warned us of approaching dawn. Oh, I'm sure I could figure out some more surly words to use. Remsen left to fetch a sledgehammer and a large knife with its edge honed to a razor-like keenness. I busied myself making 4 wooden stakes shaped like wedges. He returned bearing the horrible tools, and we struck out toward the crypt. We walked rapidly, for had either of us hesitated an instant, I verily believe we both would have fled incontinently. However, our duty lay clear before us. Remsen unlocked the door and swung it outward. With a prayer on our lips, we entered. As if by mutual understanding, we both turned toward the coffin on our left. It belonged to the grandfather. We displaced the lid, and there lay the old Holroyd. He appeared to be sleeping. His face was full of color, and he had none of the stiffness of death. The hair was matted, the mustache untrimmed, and on the beard were stains of a dull brownish hue. But it was his eyes that attracted me. They were greenish, and they glowed with an expression of fiendish malevolence such as I had never seen before. The look of baffled rage on the face might well have adorned the features of the devil in his hell. Remsen swayed and would have fallen, but I forced some keen whiskey down his throat, and he took a grip on himself. He placed one of the stakes directly over his heart, then shut his eyes and prayed that the good God above take his soul, that it was that was to be delivered unto him. I took a step backward, aimed carefully, and swung the sledge with all my strength. It hit the wedge squarely, and a terrible scream filled the place, while the blood gushed out of the open wound, up and over us, staining the walls and our clothes. Without hesitating, I swung again and again, while it struggled vainly to rid itself of that awful instrument of death. Another swing, and the stake was driven through. The thing squirmed about in the narrow confines of the coffin, much after the manner of a dismembered worm, and Remsen proceeded to sever the head from the body, making a rather crude but effectual job of it. As the final stroke of the knife cut the connection, a scream issued from the mouth, and the whole corpse fell away into dust, leaving nothing but a wooden stake lying in the bed of bones. This finished, we dispatched the remaining 3. Simultaneously, as if struck by the same thought, we felt our throats. The slight pain was gone from mine, and the wounds had entirely disappeared from my friends, leaving not even a scar. I wished to place before the world the whole facts contingent upon the mystery and the solution, but Remsen prevailed upon me to hold my peace. Some years later, Remsen died a Christian death, and with him went the only confirmation of my tale. However, 10 miles from the little town of Charing there sits an old house, forgotten these many years, and near it is a little grey crypt. Within are 4 coffins, and in each lies a wooden stake stained a brownish hue, and bearing the fingerprints of the deceased Remsen Holroyd. That was a good one. I actually like that. I thought that was pretty good. What do you guys think? Cool. Glad you enjoyed it. Well, the next one is special. It was published in 1914, after the author's death. And it is debated as to whether or not it was meant to be its own short story, or if it was a prequel to the author's most famous story. The author was a theater manager. He was at one time a barrister. He knew Oscar Wilde. His wife was once infatuated with Oscar Wilde, but ended up marrying our author. The author's name is Bram Stoker. And the story I'm about to read to you is called Dracula's Guest. When we started our drive, the sun was shining brightly in Munich. The air was full of the joyousness of early summer. Just as we were about to depart, Herr Delbruck, the maitre d'hotel of Quatre Saisons, where I was staying, came down bare-headed to the carriage, and after wishing me a pleasant drive, said to the coachman, still holding his hand on the handle of the carriage door, "Remember, you are back by nightfall. The sky looks bright, but there is a shiver in the north wind that says there may be a sudden storm. But I am sure you will not be late." Here he smiled and added, "For you know what night it is." Johann answered with an emphatic, "Ja, mein Herr," and touching his hat, drove off quickly. When we had cleared the town, I said, after signaling him to stop, "Tell me, Johann, what is tonight?" He crossed himself as he answered laconically, "Walpurgisnacht." Then he took out his watch, a great old-fashioned German silver thing as big as a turnip, and looked at it. With his eyebrows gathered together and a little impatient shrug of his shoulders, I realized that this was his way of respectfully protesting against the unnecessary delay, and sank back in the carriage, merely motioning him to proceed. He started off rapidly, as if to make up for lost time. Every now and then the horses seemed to throw up their heads and sniff the air suspiciously. On such occasions I often looked round in alarm. The road was pretty bleak, for we were traversing a sort of high windswept plateau. As we drove, I saw a road that looked but little used, and which seemed to dip through a little winding valley. It looked so inviting that even at the risk of offending him, I called Johann to stop, and when he pulled up I told him I would like to drive down that road. He made all sorts of excuses and frequently crossed himself as he spoke. This somewhat piqued my curiosity, so I asked him various questions. He answered fencingly and repeatedly looked at his watch in protest. Finally I said, "Well, Johann, I want to go down this road. I shall not ask you to come unless you like, but tell me why you do not like to go. That is all I ask." For answer he seemed to throw himself off the box, so quickly did he reach the ground. Then he stretched out his hands appealingly to me and implored me not to go. There was just enough English mixed with the German for me to understand the drift of his talk. He seemed always just about to tell me something, the very idea of which evidently frightened him. But each time he pulled himself up, saying, "Wolper Nacht." I tried to argue with him, but it was difficult to argue with a man when I did not know his language. The advantage certainly rested with him, for although he began to speak in English of a very crude and broken kind, he always got excited and broke into his native tongue, and every time he did so he looked at his watch. Then the horses became restless and sniffed the air. At this he grew very pale, and looking around in a frightened way, he suddenly jumped forward, took them by the bridles, and led them on some 20 feet. I followed and asked why he had done this. For an answer he crossed himself, pointed to the spot we had left, and drew his carriage in the direction of the other road, indicating a cross, and said, first in German, then in English, "Buried him what killed themselves." What is it with these having to use this word? I remembered the old custom of burying at crossroads. Ah, I see. A word that will not be said. How interesting! But for the life of me I could not make out why the horses were frightened. Whilst we were talking, we heard a sort of sound between a yelp and a bark. It was far away, but the horses got very restless, and it took Johann all this time to quiet them. He was pale and said, "It sounds like a wolf, but yet there are no wolves here now." "No," I said, questioning him. "Isn't it long since the wolves were so near the city?" "Long, long," he answered. "In the spring and summer, but with the snow, the wolves have been here not so long." Whilst he was petting the horses and trying to quiet them, dark clouds drifted rapidly across the sky. The sunshine passed away, and a breath of cold wind seemed to drift over us. It was only a breath, however, and more of a warning than a fact, for the sun came out brightly again. Johann looked under his lifted hand at the horizon and said, "The storm of snow, he comes before long time." Then he looked at his watch again, and straightway, holding his reins firmly, for the horses were still pawing the ground restlessly and shaking their heads, he climbed to his box as though the time had come for proceeding on our journey. I felt a little obstinate and did not at once get into the carriage. "Tell me," I said, "about this place where the road leads." I pointed down. Again he crossed himself and mumbled a prayer before he answered. "It is unholy." "What is unholy?" I required. "The village." "Then there is a village?" No one lives there hundreds of years." My curiosity was piqued. "But you said there was a village." "There was. Where is it now?" Whereupon he burst out into a long story in German and English, so mixed up that I could not quite understand exactly what he said. Roughly, I gathered that long ago, hundreds of years, men had died there and been buried in their graves, but sounds were heard under the clay, and when the graves were open, men and women were found rosy with life and their mouths red with blood, and so, in haste to save their lives, ay, and their souls, and here he crossed himself, those who were left fled away to other places where the living lived, and the dead were dead, and not something. He was evidently afraid to speak the last words. As he proceeded with his narration, he grew more and more excited. It seemed as if his imagination got hold of him, and he ended in a perfect paroxysm of fear, white-faced, perspiring, trembling, and looking around him as if expecting that some dreadful presence would manifest itself here in the bright sunshine on the open plain. Finally, in an agony of desperation, he cried, "Walpurgis Nacht. Walpurgis Nacht," and pointed to the carriage for me to get in. All my English blood rose at this, and standing back, I said, "You are afraid, Johann. You are afraid. Go home. I shall return alone. The walk will do me good." The carriage door was open. I took from my seat my oak walking stick, which I always carried on my holiday excursions, and closed the door, pointing back to Munich, and said, "Go home, Johann. Walpurgis Nacht does not concern Englishmen." Okay, buddy. The horses were now more restive than ever, and Johann was trying to hold them in, while excitedly imploring me not to do anything so foolish. I pitied the poor fellow, he was so deeply in earnest, but all the same I could not help laughing. His English was quite gone now. In his anxiety he had forgotten that his only means of making me understand was to talk my language, so he jabbered away in his native German. It began to be a little tedious. After giving the direction, "Home," I turned to go down the cross road into the valley. With a despairing gesture, Johann turned his horses toward Munich. I leaned on my stick and looked after him. He went slowly along the road for a while, then there came over the crest of the hill a man, tall and thin. I could see so much in the distance. When he drew near the horses, they began to jump and kick about, then to scream with terror. Johann could not hold them in. They bolted down the road, running away madly. I watched them out of sight, then looked for the stranger, but I found that he too was gone. With a light heart I turned down the side road through the deepening valley to which Johann had objected. There was not the slightest reason that I could see for his objection, and I dare say I trampled for a couple of hours without thinking of time or distance, and certainly without seeing a person or a house. So far as the place was concerned, it was desolation itself. But I did not notice this particularly till, on turning on... boy, my brain. Hello. But I did not notice this particularly till, on turning a bend in the road, I came upon a scattered fringe of wood. Then I recognized that I had been impressed unconsciously by the desolation of the region through which I had passed. I sat down to rest myself and began to look around. It struck me that it was considerably colder than it had been at the commencement of my walk. A sort of sighing sound seemed to be around me, with, now and then, high overhead, a sort of muffled roar. Looking upwards, I noticed that the great thick clouds were drafting rapidly across the sky from north to south at a great height. There were signs of a coming storm in some lofty stratum of the air. It was a little chilly, and thinking that it was the sitting still after the exercise of walking, I resumed my journey. Oh, you guys are awesome. 100,000 likes. Holy crap. The ground I passed over was now much more picturesque. There were no striking objects that the eye might single out, but in all there was a charm of beauty. I took little heed of time, and it was only when the deepening twilight forced itself upon me that I began to think of how I should find my way home. The air was cold, and the drifting of clouds overhead was more marked. They were accompanied by a sort of far-away rushing sound, through which seemed to come at intervals that mysterious cry which the driver had said came from a wolf. For a while I hesitated. I had said that I would see the deserted village, so on I went, and presently came on a wide stretch of open country shut in by hills all round. Their sides were covered with trees which spread down to the plain, dotting in clumps the gentler slopes and hollows which showed here and there. I followed with my eye the winding of the road and saw that it curved close to one of the densest of these clumps and was lost behind it. As I looked, there came a cold shiver in the air, and the snow began to fall. I thought of the miles and miles of bleak country I had passed, and then hurried on to seek shelter of the wood in front. Darker and darker grew the sky, and faster and heavier fell the snow, till the earth before and around me was a glistening white carpet, with the further edge of which was lost in misty vagueness. The road was here but crude, and when on the level its boundaries were not so marked when it passed through the cuttings, and in a little while I found that I must have strayed from it, for I missed underfoot the hard surface, and my feet sank deeper in the grass and moss. When the wind grew stronger, and blew with it ever-increasing force, till I was fain to run before it, the air became icy cold, and in spite of my exercise, I began to suffer. The snow was now falling so thickly and whirling around me in such rapid eddies that I could hardly keep my eyes open. Every now and then the heavens were torn asunder by vivid lightning, and in the flashes I could see ahead of me a great mass of trees, chiefly yew and cypress, all heavily coated with snow. I was soon amongst the shelter of the trees, and there in comparative silence I could hear the rush of the wind high overhead. Presently the blackness of the storm had become merged in the darkness of the night. By and by the storm seemed to be passing away. It now only came in fierce puffs and blasts. At such moments the weird sound of the wolf appeared to be echoed by many similar sounds around me. Now and again, through the black mass of drifting cloud, came a straggling ray of moonlight which lit up the expanse and showed me that I was at the edge of a dense mass of cypress and yew trees. As the snow had ceased to fall, I walked out from the shelter and began to investigate more closely. It appeared to me that among so many old foundations as I had passed, there might be still standing a house in which, though in ruins, I could find some sort of shelter for a while. As I skirted the edge of the copse, I found that a low wall encircled it, and following this, I presently found an opening. Here the cypresses formed an alley leading up to a square mass of some kind of building. Just as I caught sight of this, however, the drifting clouds obscured the moon, and I passed up the path in darkness. The wind must have grown colder, for I felt myself shiver as I walked. But there was hope of shelter, and I groped my way blindly on. I stopped, for there was a sudden stillness. The storm had passed, and perhaps in sympathy with nature's silence, my heart seemed to cease to beat. But this was only momentarily, for suddenly the moonlight broke through the clouds, showing me that I was in a graveyard. and that the square object before me was a great, massive tomb of marble, as white snow that lay on the ground, lay on and all around it. With the moonlight there came a fierce sigh of the storm, which appeared to resume its course with a long, low howl, as if many dogs or wolves. I was awed and shocked, and I felt the cold perceptibly grow upon me till it seemed to grip me by the heart. Then, while the flood of moonlight still fell on the marble tomb, the storm gave further evidence of renewing, as though it were returning on its track. Impelled by some sort of fascination, I approached the sepulchre to see what it was and why such a thing stood alone in such place. I walked around it and read over the Doric door in German, Countess Dollingen of Graz in Styria, sought and found death, 1801. On the top of the tomb, seemingly driven through the solid marble, for the structure was composed of composed of a few vast blocks of stone, was a great iron spike or stake. On going to the back, I saw graven in great Russian letters, "The dead travel fast." There was something so weird and uncanny about the whole thing that it gave me a turn and made me feel quite faint. I began to wish for the first time that I had taken Johann's advice. Here a thought struck me which came under almost mysterious circumstances, and with a terrible shock. This was Walpurgis Night. Walpurgis Night was when, according to the belief of millions of people, the devil was abroad, and when the graves were open and the dead came forth and walked, when all evil things of earth and air and water held revel. This very place the driver had specially shunned. This was the depopulated village of centuries ago. This was where it lay, and this was the place where I was alone, unmanned, shivering with cold in a shroud of snow, with a wild storm gathering again upon me. It took all my philosophy, all the religion I had been taught, all my courage not to collapse in a paroxysm of fright. And now a perfect tornado burst upon me. The ground shook as those thousands of horses thundered across it, and this time the storm bore on its icy wings not snow, but great hailstones which drove with such violence that they might have come from the throngs of Balearic slingers, hailstones that beat down leaf and branch and made the shelter of the cypresses of no more avail than though their stems were standing corn. At the first I rushed to the nearest tree, but I was soon fain to leave it and seek the only spot that seemed to afford refuge, the deep Doric doorway of the marble tomb. There, crouching against the massive bronze door, I gained a certain amount of protection from the beating hailstones. For now they only drove against me as they ricocheted from the ground and the side of the marble. As I leaned against the door, it moved slightly and opened inwards. The shelter of even a tomb was welcome in that pitiless tempest, and I was about to enter it when there came a flash of forked lightning that lit up the whole expanse of the heavens. In this instance, as I am a living man, I saw, as my eyes turned into the darkness of the tomb, a beautiful woman with rounded cheeks and red lips, seemingly sleeping on bier. As the thunder broke overhead, I was grasped as by the hand of a giant and hurled out into the storm. The whole thing was so sudden that before I could realize the shock, moral was as physical. I found the hailstones beating me down. At the same time, I had a strange, dominating feeling that I was not alone. I looked towards the tomb. Just then there came another blinding flash which seemed to strike the iron stake that surmounted the tomb and to pour through the earth, blasting and crumbling the marble as it burst of flame. The dead woman rose for a moment of agony while she was lapped in the flame, and her bitter scream of pain was drowned in the thunderclash. The last thing I heard was this mingling of dreadful sound, as I again was seized in the giant grasp and dragged away, while the hailstones beat on me, and the air around seemed reverberant with the howling of wolves. The last sight I remembered was a vague white moving mass, as if all the graves around me had sent out the phantoms of their sheeted dead, and that they were closing in on me through the white cloudiness of the driving hail. Gradually there came a sort of vague beginning of consciousness, then a sense of weariness that was dreadful. For a time I remembered nothing, but slowly my senses returned. My feet seemed positively racked with pain, yet I could not move them. They seemed to be numbed. There was an icy feeling at the back of my neck, and all down my spine and my ears, like my feet, were dead yet in torment. But there was in my breast a sense of warmth which was by comparison delicious. It was as a nightmare, a physical nightmare, if one may use such an expression, for some heavy weight on my chest made it difficult for me to breathe. This period of semi-lethargy seemed to remain a long time, and as it faded away I must have slept or swooned. Then came a sort of loathing, like the first stage of seasickness, and a wild desire to be free of something. I knew not what. A vast stillness enveloped me, as though all the world were asleep or dead, only broken by the low panting as of some animal close to me. I felt a warm rasping at my throat. Then came a consciousness of the awful truth which chilled me to the heart and sent the blood surging up through my brain. Some great animal was lying on me and now licking my throat. I feared to stir, for some instinct of prudence bade me lie still. But the brute seemed to realize that there was now some change in me, for it raised its head. Through my eyelashes I saw above me the two great flaming eyes of a gigantic wolf. Its sharp white teeth gleamed in the gaping red mouth, and I could feel its hot breath fierce and acrid upon me. For another spell of time I remembered no more. Then I became conscious of a low growl, followed by a yelp renewed again and again. Then something very far away. I heard a "Halloa! Halloa!" as of many voices calling in unison. Cautiously I raised my head and looked in the direction whence the sound came, but the cemetery blocked my view. The wolf still continued to yelp in a strange way, and a red glare began to move around the grove of cypresses, as though following the sound. As the voices drew closer, the wolf yelped faster and louder. I feared to make either sound or motion. Nearer came the red glow over the white pall which stretched into the darkness around me. Then, all at once, from beyond the trees, there came at a trot a troop of horsemen bearing torches. The wolf rose from my breast and made for the cemetery. I saw one of the horsemen, soldiers by their caps and their long military cloaks, raise his carbine and take aim. A companion knocked up his arm, and I heard the ball whiz over my head. He had evidently taken my body for that of the wolf. Another sighted the animal as it slunk away, and a shot followed. Then, at a gallop, the troop rode forward, some towards me, others following the wolf as it disappeared amongst the snow-clad cypresses. As they drew nearer, I tried to move, but was powerless, although I could see and hear all that went on around me. 2 or 3 of the soldiers jumped from their horses and knelt beside me. One of them raised my head and placed his hand over my heart. "Good news, comrades," he cried. "His heart still beats." Then some brandy was poured down my throat. It put vigor into me, and I was able to open my eyes fully and look around. Lights and shadows were moving among the trees, and I heard men call to one another. They drew together, uttering frightened exclamations, and the lights flashed as the others came pouring out of the cemetery pell-mell like men possessed. When the further ones came close to us, those who were around me asked them eagerly, "Well, have you found him?" The reply rang out hurriedly, "No, no, come away, quick, quick! This is no place to stay on this of all nights." "What was it?" was the question asked in all manner of keys. The answer came variously and all indefinitely, as though the men were moved by some common impulse to speak, yet were restrained by some common fear from giving their thoughts. It indeed," gibbered one whose wits had plainly given out for the moment. "A wolf, and yet not a wolf," another put in shudderingly. "No use trying for him without the sacred bullet," a third remarked in a more ordinary manner. "Serve us right for coming out on this night. Truly we have earned our 1,000 marks," were the ejaculations of a fourth. "There was blood on the broken marble," another said after a pause. "The lightning never brought that hair. And for him, is he safe? Look at his throat. See, comrades, the wolf has been lying on him and keeping his blood warm." The officer looked at my throat and replied, "He is all right. The skin is not pierced. What does it all mean? We should never have found him but for the yelping of the wolf." "What became of it?" asked the man who was holding up my head, and who seemed the least panic-stricken of the party, for his hands were steady and without tremor. On his sleeve was the chevron of a petty officer. "It went home," answered the man, whose long face was pallid and who actually shook with terror as he glanced around him fearfully. "There are graves enough there in which it may lie. Come, comrades, come quickly. Let us leave this cursed spot." The officer raised me to a sitting position as he uttered a word of command. Then several men placed me upon a horse. He sprang to the saddle behind me, took me in his arms, and gave the word to advance. And turning our faces away from the cypresses, we rode away in swift military order. As yet my tongue refused its office, and I was perforce silent. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remembered was finding myself standing up, supported by a soldier on each side of me. It was almost broad daylight, and to the north a red streak of sunlight was reflected like a path of blood over the waste of snow. The officer was telling the men to say nothing of what they had seen, except that they found an English stranger guarded by a large dog. "Dog! That was no dog," cut in the man who had exhibited such fear. "I think I know a wolf when I see one." The young officer answered calmly, "I said a dog." dog, reiterated the other ironically. It was evident that his courage was rising with the sun, and pointed to me, he said. Look at his throat. Is that the work of a dog, master? Instinctively I raised my hand to my throat, and as I touched it I cried out in pain. The men crowded around to look, some stooping down from their saddles, and again there came the calm voice of the young officer. A dog, as I said. If aught else were said, we should only be laughed at. I was then mounted behind a trooper, and we rode into the suburbs of Munich. Here we came across a stray carriage into which I was lifted, and was driven off to the Quatre Saisons, the young officer accompanying me, whilst a trooper followed with his horse, and the others rode off to their barracks. When we arrived, Herr Delbruck rushed so quickly down the steps to meet me that it was apparent he had been watching within. Taking me by both hands, he solicitously led me in. The officer saluted me and was turning to withdraw when I recognized his purpose and insisted that he should come to my rooms. Over a glass of wine, I warmly thanked him and his brave comrades for saving me. He replied simply that he was more than glad, and that Herr Delbruck had at the first taken steps to make all the searching party pleased, at which ambiguous utterance the maitre d'hotel smiled, while the officer pleaded duty and withdrew. But, Herr Delbruck, I inquired, how and why was it that the soldiers searched for me? He shrugged his shoulders, as if in depreciation of his own deed, as he replies, I was so fortunate as to obtain leave from the commander of the regiment in which I serve to ask for volunteers. But how did you know I was lost? I asked. The driver came hither with the remains of his carriage, which had been upset when the horses ran away. But surely you would not send a search party of soldiers merely on this account. Oh, no, he answered. But even before the coachman arrived, I had this telegram from the Boyar whose guest you are. And he took from me his pocket a telegram which he handed to me, and I read, Bistritz, be careful of my guest. His safety is most precious to me. Should aught happen to him, or if he be missed, spare nothing to find him and ensure his safety. He is English, and therefore adventurous. There are often dangers from snow and wolves at night. Lose not a moment if you suspect harm to him. I answer your zeal with my fortune. Dracula. As I held the telegram in my hand, the room seemed to whirl around me, and if the inattentive maitre d'hotel had not caught me, I think I should have fallen. There was something so strange in all this, something so weird and impossible to imagine, that there grew on me a sense of my being in some way the sport of opposite forces, the mere vague idea of which seemed in a way to paralyze me. I was certainly under some form of mysterious protection. From a distant country had come, in the very nick of time, a message that took me out of the danger of the snow sleep and the jaws of the wolf. So, what do you guys think of that one? I thought it was pretty cool. I haven't read it in a long time, so I kind of forgot some of it, but very enjoyable. He certainly did. I mean, it's interesting because his work is, I mean, he really, his biggest work was Dracula. And that was kind of pigeonholed him. Um, yeah. It's an interesting fact. I don't know if you guys knew this, but the movie Nosferatu, not the most recent one, but the one back from 1922, was a silent film, and it was quite literally the same story as Dracula, to the point where Florence Stoker, Bram Stoker's wife, sued the people that made Nosferatu to get them to pull the film and destroy it. Fortunately, she did not get her way. The cool part about it, and if you find where you can watch the original Nosferatu from 1922, it's a silent film. It actually holds up really well. Surprisingly enough, given the fact that it's so old. But that is all for tonight. Florence Stoker. What's interesting is that Stoker and Florence and Oscar Wilde apparently went to school together. You're welcome, and good night to you. So we are on night 4 of the birthday week. We've got 2 days left, Friday and Saturday. Now, I know you guys voted for horror tonight, and I said I was going to do science fiction tomorrow, and I will. I have a story picked out. It's going to be a 1-story evening, and should be a good time. Well, thank you guys for coming, and awesome. Well, happy pre-birthday to Gabe. So, Well, thank you guys for coming in and spending an evening with me. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the stories, and I'll be back tomorrow with our regular Friday Night Live, and we'll be reading a classic tale of science fiction. And then Saturday, we'll be doing probably 2 or 3 stories, and then we'll be back on our regular schedule starting Sunday, where we start Winnie the Pooh. So I hope you all join me for that. If you enjoy the stories and would like to support what I do, you please consider subscribing or becoming a super fan. It helps keep the campfire lit. But please understand, subscribed or not, I am happy that you're here, and I appreciate you and your support. So, until then, Wings, you may get your wish. But I will, that's something I'll announce later. If I'm going to do some testing, and we'll announce that later to see if it actually becomes a thing. So, So, all right. Well, until tomorrow night, please be kind to each other and be kind to yourself, because kindness matters. And so do you. Good night, everybody. And good night over there on the tubes. I appreciate you being here.